They say a single drop of blood can summon a shark, but for Bridget, it was a spilled glass of 1990 Romane Conti. When the heavy-set, exhausted waitress drenched San Diego's most ruthless crime syndicate boss in red wine, she expected a bullet. Instead, she woke up to a gilded cage. The Azure Room in downtown San Diego was the kind of restaurant where a single appetizer cost more than Bridget Lawson made in an entire week. It was a cathedral of whispered wealth, smelling of white truffles, aged oak and arrogance. Bridget, at 26 years old and carrying 250 pounds on her 5'4" frame, knew she was an anomaly here. The standard Azure Room waitress was a size 2, moved like a gazelle, and had a trust fund as a backup plan. Bridget, on the other hand, was just trying to survive. Her uniform was a daily torment. The management refused to order anything above a size 14, forcing Bridget to squeeze her generous curves into a rigid black pencil skirt that bit viciously into her waist. A hidden safety pin held the zipper together at the back, and her thick thighs chafed with every hurried step between the kitchen and the dining floor. She was invisible to the elite patrons, a mere ghost pouring water and clearing plates, enduring the sneers and the condescending looks from men whose suits cost more than her car. But tonight, the atmosphere in the Azure Room was different. The air was thick, suffocatingly tense. The usual gentle clinking of silverware and soft jazz had been replaced by a stifled, anxious silence. At table 4, the VIP booth, cloaked in the shadows of the restaurant's back corners, sat Dominic Rossi. He was the ghost of the San Diego underworld, a man whose name was only spoken in hushed, terrified whispers. He wasn't a loud, cigar-chomping caricature. Dominic was lethal, elegant, and chillingly quiet. Dressed in a bespoke charcoal Brioni suit that clung to his broad shoulders, his dark eyes scanned the room with the predatory calm of a wolf observing a flock of sheep. Flanking his booth were 3 men, whose tailored jackets did nothing to hide the heavy bulges of firearms at their ribs. Gregory Fisk, the restaurant's skeletal hypercritical matred, was sweating profusely. The waitress originally assigned to table 4 had locked herself in the employee restroom, hyperventilating in sheer terror. "You," Gregory hissed, grabbing Bridget by the elbow, his manicured nails digging into her plump arm. "You're taking table 4, the Rossi party, and God help you if you breathe too loud. They ordered the Ninetti Romane Conti. Do not screw this up, you clumsy cow." Bridget's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Her palms were slick with nervous sweat as she retrieved the dark, dusty bottle from the cellar. It was a $12,000 bottle of wine. She carried it on a silver tray, alongside 3 crystal goblets, feeling the eyes of Dominic's men track her every heavy, labored step. She felt massive, clumsy, and entirely out of place under their scrutinizing gaze. She reached the table. Dominic didn't look up from his conversation. Bridget's hands trembled as she presented the cork, uncorked the bottle with a specialized key, and moved to pour the first tasting for the boss. She leaned in. The fabric of her skirt strained the safety pin, groaning under the pressure of her deep breath. As she tilted the bottle, the man sitting to Dominic's left abruptly shifted his chair backward. It struck Bridget's knee. Her ankle rolled. The heavy tray tipped. Time seemed to freeze in a horrifying tableau. Bridget watched in slow motion as the bottle of Romane Conti slipped from her grasp. It struck the edge of the mahogany table, shattering into jagged shards. A tidal wave of dark burgundy liquid exploded outward, drenching Dominic Rossi's crisp white shirt, ruining his silk tie, and pooling into the lap of his thousands of dollars trousers. The deep red stain looked exactly like blood. A deafening silence dropped over the restaurant, The jazz music seemed to choke. One of Dominic's guards instantly had his hand inside his jacket, gripping the handle of a gun. Bridget stood frozen, a shard of dark glass embedded in her thick calf, bleeding through her opaque tights. She couldn't breathe. She was dead. She knew she was dead. Gregory practically materialized out of thin air, his face purple with rage. "You stupid fat pig!" he shrieked, entirely losing his polished demeanor in the face of his own panic. He lunged at Bridget, grabbing her aggressively by the shoulders and shaking her. "Do you know who this is? You're done! I'll make sure you pay for this if it takes the rest of your miserable life!" He raised a hand, fully intending to slap her across the face to appease the mobster. "Take your hands off her!" The voice wasn't a yell. It was a low, gravelly command that vibrated with such intense malice that the entire room froze. Dominic Rossi stood up. He didn't even glance down at his ruined suit. He didn't look at the shattered glass. His dark, fathomless eyes were locked entirely on Gregory's hands, which were still gripping Bridget. Dominic moved with terrifying speed. In a fraction of a second, he crossed the space, grabbed Gregory by the throat, and slammed the matred face first into the mahogany table, right into the pool of spilled wine and broken glass. Gregory shrieked, thrashing wildly, but Dominic held him down with the effortless strength of a machine. "I detest men who put their hands on women," Dominic whispered, pressing Gregory's cheek harder into the glass. "And I despise men who insult what belongs to me." He released the weeping manager, letting him slide to the floor before turning his gaze to Bridget. She was trembling violently, tears streaking her flushed round cheeks. She expected his wrath to turn on her next. Instead, Dominic Rossi dropped to one knee right there in the middle of the azure room. The gasps from the other patrons were audible. The most feared man in the city knelt in a puddle of wine. He picked up a pristine white linen napkin from the table, reached out and gently pressed it against Bridget's bleeding calf. His touch was warm, surprisingly tender, and sent a shocking jolt of electricity up her spine. He looked up at her, his dark eyes tracing the curve of her hips, the fullness of her stomach, the soft, tear-stained roundness of her face. There was no disgust in his gaze, only a dark, burning hunger that made Bridget's breath catch in her throat. "What is your name, Tesoro?" he asked softly, his thumb brushing against her leg. Bridget!" She stammered, her voice barely a squeak. Dominic stood up, towering over her. He reached out and gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "Bridget," he repeated, tasting the syllables. "Go to the locker room. Pack your things." Am I fired?" she whispered, terrified. A slow, predatory smile touched the corners of Dominic's lips. "No. I just bought this restaurant, and you, Bridget, no longer serve anyone but me." Bridget didn't pack her locker. She ran. She bolted out the back alley door of the azure room, her chest heaving, the cold San Diego night air stinging her lungs. She didn't wait for a bus. She practically sprinted the 6 blocks to the train station, constantly looking over her shoulder, convinced one of Dominic Rossi's armed shadows was right behind her. She lived in a tiny, dilapidated apartment in Logan Square, a place that smelled permanently of boiled cabbage and old dust. When she finally locked her deadbolt, sliding all 3 rusted chain locks into place, she collapsed against the door, sliding down until her heavy body hit the linoleum floor. She wept until she threw up. She had just assaulted a mafia boss. The man had bought a multi-million-dollar restaurant just to trap her. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was a horror movie, and she was the tragic, clumsy casualty. She expected men to kick her door down in the middle of the night to finish the job. She expected a bullet through her window. But the night passed in suffocating silence. At 8 a.m., a sharp, authoritative knock hammered on her door. Bridget scrambled backward, grabbing a heavy cast-iron skillet from her tiny stove. "Go away!" she screamed. "Delivery for Miss Lawson," a muffled voice replied. Cautiously, Bridget peered through the peephole. A man in a pristine delivery uniform stood holding a clipboard, flanked by two towering men in black suits, who looked unmistakably like Rossi's soldiers from the restaurant. Trembling, she unchained the door just enough to see out. The delivery men didn't force their way in. They simply began stacking large, elegant black boxes with velvet ribbons outside her door, nodded respectfully to her, and walked away. Bridget dragged the boxes inside. There were 6 of them stamped with the logos of designers she had only seen in glossy magazines. Marina Rinaldi, custom pieces from Givenchy high-end Italian silks. Heart pounding, she opened the first box. Inside lay a breathtaking emerald green wrap dress. She held it up. It wasn't a sample size. It was huge. It was perfectly exactly her size. A chill crawled over her skin. She opened the next box. A tailored cashmere winter coat, cut precisely to accommodate her broad shoulders and wide hips. Another box contained custom-made leather boots designed for wide calves. There were silk nightgowns that felt like liquid against her skin, all structured to flatter a heavy, curvy body. At the bottom of the last box sat a thick, cream-colored envelope, sealed with dark red wax. Her trembling fingers broke the seal. The handwriting inside was sharp, aggressive, and perfectly slanted. The uniform was suffocating you. It was a crime against your beauty. Wear the green silk tonight. My driver will be downstairs at 8 p.m. Do not make me come up there to fetch you. D. Panic set in. How did he know her sizes down to the exact inch? The realization was nauseatingly clear he hadn't just guessed. He had her measured, or photographed, or watched. The obsession hadn't started with the spilled wine. It ran deeper. Bridget knew she couldn't get into that car. She had to run. But she had no money, and she had an anchor weighing her down, her older brother, Tommy. Tommy was an addict and a compulsive gambler who owed money to the worst people in San Diego. Bridget had been working double shifts entirely to keep Tommy's kneecaps intact. She grabbed her cheap flip phone and called him. No answer. Fear overriding her paralysis. She threw on her old jeans and a baggy sweater, ignoring the thousands of dollars of couture on her bed, and rushed out. She took the L train to the south side, heading to the rusted-out auto body shop where Tommy squatted. When she arrived, the heavy metal garage door was half open. Inside, she heard the sickening sound of flesh hitting flesh, followed by her brother's agonized scream. Bridget rushed in. Tommy was on his knees, his face a bloody, unrecognizable pulp. Standing over him was Mickey Callahan, a vicious enforcer for the Irish mob, holding a blood-stained aluminum baseball bat. 2 of Mickey's thugs stood by, laughing. "Tommy!" Bridget screamed, throwing her heavy body forward, placing herself between the bat and her brother. Mickey paused, wiping sweat from his forehead. He looked Bridget up and down, a cruel sneer twisting his scarred face. Well, well, if it isn't the fat little sister coming to save the day. Move, Shamu. Your brother owes us 60 grand. And since he doesn't have the cash, we're taking it out in bone marrow. Please! Bridget begged, tears streaming down her face. I'll get the money. I just lost my job, but I'll find another one. I'll pay you. Mickey laughed, a harsh, barking sound. He reached out his dirty fingers, grabbing a handful of Bridget's hair, yanking her head back. You with what's stripping at a circus, your worthless piggy. In fact, maybe I'll just break your legs to teach him a lesson. He raised the bat. Bridget squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the shattering pain. Bang! The deafening crack of a gunshot echoed in the concrete garage. A spray of warm crimson splattered across Bridget's cheek. The grip on her hair instantly vanished. She opened her eyes to a scene of absolute carnage. Mickey Callahan was on the ground shrieking in agony, clutching a ruined, bleeding kneecap. His two thugs were frozen, staring at the entrance of the garage. 3 matte black SUVs had pulled up silently outside. A dozen men in tactical gear and tailored suits flooded the garage, weapons drawn and leveled at the Irish mobsters. Through the parting sea of armed men walked Dominic Rossi. He was dressed in a black turtleneck and an impeccably tailored black suit. He looked like an angel of death. He held a smoking, suppressed pistol in his right hand. He didn't even look at the man he had just shot. His dark, obsessive eyes were locked entirely on Bridget. He walked toward her, his heavy leather shoes crunching on the gravel. He stopped inches from her. Gently he took his silk pocket square and wiped the speck of Mickey's blood from Bridget's soft cheek. His breathing was heavy, a terrifying rage radiating from his body. "I told you," Dominic said, his voice a deadly quiet rumble that echoed in the silent garage, "to wear the green dress." Why are you doing this?" Bridget sobbed, trembling so hard she could barely stand. "Why do you care about a spilled glass of wine? Just leave me alone." Dominic's hand slid from her cheek to the back of her neck, his large fingers tangling in her hair. He pulled her flush against his chest. She could smell the gunpowder mixed with expensive Tom Ford cologne. He leaned down his lips, brushing against her ear, sending a terrifying shiver down her spine as he whispered the truth. "You think the wine was an accident, Tesoro?" Dominic murmured, his voice thick with a dark, twisted possession. "I paid Gregory to force you into that tight uniform. I ordered my man to bump your tray. I bought Tommy's debt from the Callahans 6 months ago." Bridget's blood ran cold. She stared up at him, her eyes wide with horror and a sick, confusing magnetism. "I saw you eating a cannoli outside a bakery in Little Italy in the rain a year ago." Dominic continued his thumb, tracing her lower lip. "You were the most beautiful, magnificent creature I had ever laid eyes on. But you were too independent, too stubborn to let a monster like me into your life. So I had to break your world, Bridget. I had to orchestrate your ruin, just so I could be the only one capable of putting you back together." He kissed her forehead, sealing her fate. "Now let's go home." The Lake Forest estate was less of a home and more of a fortress disguised as a billionaire's architectural fever dream. Wrought iron gates, standing 20 feet high, parted silently to admit the convoy of black SUVs. Bridget sat frozen in the back of the Maybach, the buttery leather of the seats doing nothing to warm the ice in her veins. Beside her, Dominic Rossi radiated a terrifying, possessive calm. He hadn't let go of her hand since the auto garage. His thumb continuously, methodically stroked the soft, fleshy back of her palm. When they stepped out into the biting San Diego wind, the sheer scale of the limestone mansion stole what little breath Bridget had left. "Welcome home, mio cuore," Dominic murmured, his hand resting heavily on the curve of her lower back, guiding her inside. The interior was a masterclass in intimidating wealth. Towering ceilings, original Renaissance oils, and a sweeping marble staircase that looked like it belonged in a museum. But Bridget couldn't focus on the luxury. Her mind was a chaotic loop of gunfire, Mickey Callahan's ruined knee, and Dominic's chilling confession. He had engineered her entire downfall. He had orchestrated her misery just to play the savior. For the next 3 weeks, Bridget existed in a state of luxurious captivity. She was given the master suite's adjoining wing. Her closets were stuffed with custom-tailored designer garments that fit her 250-pound frame with meticulous, flattering precision. She was never locked in a room, but she was never alone. 2 massive guardsmen who looked like they chewed gravel for breakfast stood at the ends of her hallway. Dominic's obsession manifested in a suffocating, intoxicating worship. He didn't hide her. He didn't ask her to change. For a woman who had spent 26 years being told to shrink to diet, to apologize for the space she took up, Dominic's attention was a dangerous narcotic. Dinner was a nightly ritual. He would seat her at the head of a massive mahogany dining table, dismissing the staff so he could serve her himself. He brought her plates of rich, truffle-laced risotto slow-roasted lamb and delicate cream-filled pastries. "Eat, Bridget," he would command softly, his dark eyes tracking every movement of her lips. When she hesitated, feeling the old ingrained shame of eating heavily in front of a man, Dominic would step behind her chair. His large hands would cup her soft, wide hips, his thumbs pressing into the flesh through her silk dresses. "Do not deny yourself. You are perfect. Every curve, every ounce of you belongs to me. I will not have you starve my queen." He worshipped the very body the world had told her to hate. It was a sick, twisted psychological trap, and Bridget, drowning in trauma and exhaustion, felt herself slipping into the snare. But not everyone in the Rossi syndicate was enthralled by the boss's new fixation. Enter Lorenzo Enzo Bianchi, Dominic's underboss. Enzo was a jagged, cruel man who operated strictly on logic and brutality. He viewed Bridget not as a queen, but as a massive, glaring vulnerability. One afternoon, while Dominic was meeting with the commission downtown, Enzo cornered Bridget in the estate's library. He tossed a thick manila folder onto the coffee table. The label read, "Cook County District Attorney, Operation Ironclad." "You think you're living a fairy tale, Lawson?" Enzo sneered, leaning over the table. "Look at it. Those are the 2024 federal indictments. The San Diego Sun-Times has been trying to nail Dominic to the wall for racketeering, extortion, and 3 homicides. Special Agent Richard Harrison from the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force is breathing down our necks." Bridget stared at the glossy surveillance photos spilling from the folder. Pictures of Dominic walking out of warehouses, pictures of body bags. "Dominic used to be a ghost," Enzo continued, his voice dripping with venom. "He was untouchable. Now he's starting turf wars with the Irish to protect your junkie brother. He's buying restaurants to play house with a fat waitress. You are making him weak. And in our world, weak men get put in the ground." "I never asked for this," Bridget whispered, her voice trembling. "Let me go. Tell him to let me go." Enzo laughed humorlessly. "He'd burn San Diego to the ground before he let you walk out that gate. No, Lawson, the only way you leave is in a box, and if you end up getting him killed, I'll put you in it myself." The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Bridget realized then that her gilded cage was sitting on a powder keg. Dominic's obsession had saved her from poverty, but it had thrust her into a war zone. She wasn't just a captive, she was a target. The tension in the syndicate reached its boiling point on the night of the winter solstice gala. Dominic had insisted Bridget accompany him. He draped her in a custom deep crimson velvet gown that hugged her heavy breasts and flared elegantly over her wide hips. He fastened a collar of flawless, heavy diamonds around her thick neck. "Breathtaking," he whispered, kissing the soft skin behind her ear. "Tonight the city sees who rules them." The gala was held at a private, secure estate overlooking Lake Michigan. It was a room filled with politicians, dirty judges, and the city's most lethal predators, all sipping champagne and pretending to be civilized. Bridget clung to Dominic's arm, feeling the weight of 100 scrutinizing stares. She felt the sneers, the whispered insults about her size, but every time someone looked too long, Dominic's lethal glare shut them down. Around midnight, Dominic was pulled into a private study by a state senator. He left Bridget by the grand staircase, flanked by 2 of his best men. "Do not move from this spot," Dominic instructed, kissing her forehead. "I will be back in 2 minutes." But he wasn't. 5 minutes passed. Then the crystal chandeliers flickered and died. The grand hall plunged into absolute darkness. Panic erupted. The sound of breaking glass and screaming echoed through the cavernous room. Bridget's heart hammered against her ribs. Suddenly, the two guards flanking her slumped to the floor with sickening thuds, the distinct ft of suppressed gunfire cutting through the screams. Someone grabbed Bridget's arm, a grip like a steel vice. It was Enzo. "Time to go, piggy," he hissed in her ear. He didn't pull her toward the exits. He dragged her violently toward the servants' corridors, deeper into the dark, labyrinthine mansion. Bridget stumbled, her heavy velvet dress tangling around her legs. Enzo was moving too fast, his grip bruising her arm. "What are you doing?" Bridget screamed, fighting against him. "Saving the family." Enzo spat, shoving her into the sprawling stainless steel industrial kitchen. The emergency lights bathed the room in a sickly yellow glow. Dominic lost his mind over a piece of trash. "I made a deal with the Callahans. They get you as payback for Mickey's knee, and the Rossi family gets peace. Dominic will grieve, but he'll survive." "He'll kill you," Bridget gasped, backing away until her wide hips hit the cold steel of a massive preparation island. "He won't know it was me. He'll think the Irish simply breached the party." Enzo drew a heavy silver revolver from his jacket, leveling it at her chest. "Now keep your mouth shut. The Callahans are coming through the loading dock in 60 seconds. Bridget looked at the gun. She looked at the cruel, calculating eyes of the man who was about to hand her over to be tortured to death. All her life, Bridget had frozen in the face of conflict. She had shrunk away, apologized for her existence, let her manager abuse her, let her brother use her. But as the heavy diamond necklace bit into her collarbone, a strange dark fire ignited in her chest. Dominic's twisted obsession had planted a seed of absolute arrogance in her. He worshipped her. He had burned down her world to make her his queen. She wasn't a clumsy fat waitress anymore. She was Dominic Rossi's weakness, which meant she was the most dangerous thing in this room. Enzo glanced toward the loading dock doors as a heavy pounding started from the outside. That split second of distraction was all Bridget needed. She didn't try to run. She knew she couldn't outrun a bullet. Instead, she used the one thing she had spent her whole life hating her mass. With a feral scream, Bridget threw her entire 250-pound frame forward. She didn't tackle Enzo. She tackled the towering, heavy steel rack of industrial pots and pans standing right beside him. Her heavy shoulder slammed into the metal with the force of a battering ram. The rack buckled. Hundreds of pounds of cast-iron steel pots and heavy ladles cascaded down like a metal avalanche directly onto Enzo. He shrieked as a massive cast-iron Dutch oven struck his head. The revolver fired wildly into the ceiling, deafening in the tiled room. Enzo collapsed, pinned beneath the sprawling metal blood pouring from his temple. Bridget didn't stop. Adrenaline and pure survival instinct overrode her terror. She grabbed the heaviest cast-iron skillet from the floor, just like she had in her apartment weeks ago, and stood over the groaning underboss. The loading dock doors burst open. 3 men with assault rifles rushed in. Before they could even raise their weapons, the kitchen doors behind Bridget exploded inward. Bridget dropped to the floor, covering her head, as bullet casings rained down on the tiles. It was over in less than 10 seconds. The 3 Irish hitmen lay dead. The kitchen fell dead silent, save for the dripping of a punctured water pipe. Dominic dropped his rifle and practically flew across the room, sliding to his knees beside Bridget. His hands were frantic, checking her face, her chest, her arms for bullet wounds. "Bridget, Tesoro, are you hit? Look at me." "I'm okay." She gasped, her hands shaking violently. Dominic let out a ragged, desperate breath, pulling her heavy body tightly against his chest. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling her scent. Then he looked down and saw Enzo. The underboss was bleeding out, Pinned beneath the wreckage Bridget had caused the cast-iron skillet, lying ominously near Bridget's hand. Dominic looked from the wreckage to Bridget. A slow, dark, terrifyingly proud smile spread across his blood-spattered face. He reached out and gently traced the line of her jaw. "My beautiful, dangerous queen," he whispered, his eyes burning with a love so toxic and absolute it eclipsed the room. Enzo coughed up blood, reaching weakly toward Dominic. "Boss, she's a monster." Dominic didn't even look at the dying man. He kept his eyes locked on Bridget, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. Without breaking eye contact with the woman he worshipped, Dominic unholstered his sidearm, pointed it blindly at Enzo, and pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed with a final, brutal finality. Bridget flinched, but she didn't pull away. She looked at the blood on her dress, at the bodies on the floor, and finally into the fathomless, obsessive eyes of the Mafia boss holding her. The terrified waitress from the Azure room was dead. In her place, forged in spilled wine and gunfire, a dark queen was born. She wrapped her arms around Dominic's neck, pulling him down into a deep, desperate kiss, finally accepting the beautiful bloody cage she would rule forever.